And welcome to the Brain Forum and another one of our Brain Forum debates 2020. Now today, very, very interesting topic. We are asking, does mindfulness really work? What is mindfulness? Who can do mindfulness? Should we all be doing it, or is a load of old baloney? Well, we're going to be finding out all about that, and I've got some terrific experts joining our debating panel today. So first up, we have our esteemed chairperson. There she is, joined by the wonderful world of technology, Dr. Sara Lazar. Hi, Sara.
Hello.
Good to see you. Now, Dr. Sara, she is an associate researcher in the Psychiatry department at Massachusetts General Hospital and an assistant professor in psychology at Harvard Medical School. Her work focuses on the neural mechanisms underlying the beneficial effects of yoga and meditation from both a clinical healing perspective and in healthy individuals. Wow, that is one hell of a start there, Dr. Sara. Delighted to have you here as our chair. Thank you very much. Also joining us remotely today, a very busy chap indeed in his office, we can see. Yeah. Excellent. There he is, we got Murali Doraiswamy. Hi, Murali.
Hello, everyone.
Good to see you. Now, Murali is a professor of psychiatry and medicine at the Duke University School of Medicine, where he is a highly respected physician neuroscientist at the Duke Institute for Brain Sciences. Now, he specialises in the area of brain health and personalised medicine and leads a clinical trials unit in developing novel personal diagnostics and therapeutics for cognitive enhancement and mental well-being. Great stuff. Murali, good to have you with us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And we have live in the studio. Now, I keep saying to you, I keep getting you to the names wrong. I don't know why. I don't know why it is, but let's start with Will. We have Will Williams. Will, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Now, Will is the founder of Behaviour meditation. He is also no less. He just threw this in right at the end. He went, oh, there's also something else that I've done. I'm the founder of World Meditation Day. That's quite a huge deal. Particularly this debate, Will. Author of best-selling book, The Effortless Mind, and contributing editor to Psychology's magazine. He combines extensive knowledge of the world's most revered ancient teachings with cutting-edge science to provide modern meditators with a simple and powerful technique. I'm very pleased you're here.
So am I.
I'm very much your sponge today.
Excellent.
Teach
Bring
me
it on.
everything you know, and everybody else as well that's watching. And of course, we have Dr. Miguel Farias. Hi, Miguel.
Hello.
Good to have you here. Now, Miguel is an academic and a writer who leads the Brain Belief and Behaviour group at Coventry University. Now, his primary research explores the biological roots and psychological impact of beliefs and spiritual practices, including meditation. Good to have you here. Ready for debate. And then there's myself as the MC today. Of course, we've got Dr. Sara, who's kindly the chair, but I'm taking part in the panel as well. Hello to you. My name is Anna Williamson. I'm a TV and radio broadcaster. I'm also the best-selling author of self-help book, Breaking Mad, The Insider's Guide to Conquering Anxiety, and I'm a very fierce mental health campaigner for the UK's #1 mental health charity, Mind. So that is our esteemed panel today. We are talking about mindfulness. Does mindfulness really work? Let's be honest, I think we've all heard of it. I think we're all intrigued by it. Well, I know I certainly am. But over to our chair, first of all, Dr. Sara, Dr. Lazar. First of all, tell us, what actually is mindfulness?
Right. That's a great question. So I think there's sometimes a little bit of confusion because there's mindfulness meditation, and then there is Buddhism. And so I'm going to try to disentangle those three. So mindfulness is very simple. Mindfulness can be done anytime, anywhere. All mindfulness is awareness of what's happening right now in your sensory experience, and doing it in an open, curious, non-judgmental, non-reactive way. So right now, listening to me, you might be noticing the sound of my voice or something about my appearance. You might be noticing something about your posture or your contact with the floor or something in the room around you. And that's all it is. And the key thing is the non-reactive, non-judging component to it. So for instance, you might be feeling like, oh, the room is really, really hot, or the room is really, really cold, and I don't like it because it's too hot or it's too cold. Or, there's something that you're just not liking about your experience right in this moment. And so that is the judgy, not accepting, not liking your experience. And what mindfulness is to just say, okay, this is how it is right now. And can I be okay with it regardless of how it is? So that's what mindfulness is. And like I said, anyone can do it anytime, very, very simple. But it's really hard to remember to do it and to do it for extended periods of time. So that's where mindfulness meditation comes in. And so mindfulness meditation is just practicing doing just that for 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes a day. So for, however long you want, you sit and you just practice being aware of your sensory experience. And most people choose, say, their breath or their posture or something about, maybe sounds in the room. And you just commit to saying, okay, for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, I'm just going to notice my breathing. And you just notice the sensations of your belly, inhaling and exhaling. How do you know you're breathing? What is the actual sensations of breathing? And so just putting aside all other thoughts, of course, other thoughts are going to arise. And when they do, just say, okay, those are just thoughts, put them aside and just keep coming back to the focus of what is the sensation of breathing. And when we do that regularly, it helps us become more mindful throughout the day and more aware of our experience throughout the day. And you can think of it a lot like physical exercise, right? So anyone can run 10 feet. But if you want to, or I should say meters, I suppose, right? Anyone can run 10 meters. But if you want to run a further distance and be in shape, you need to really practice doing that over and over and over again, every day. And then finally, there's, Buddhism and Hinduism and, these different major religious traditions which incorporate mindfulness into their teachings. And so those, they have meditation, but they also have additional philosophy. And what's really happened is that over the last 20, 30 years, 40 years, scientists and clinicians have started to create programs that incorporate mindfulness meditation without any of the Eastern religious philosophy. And so they're really three separate things. Though often the way people use the terms, they sort of get used interchangeably.
That's a great thing to clarify, actually, and I'll bring over. Thank you very much, Dr. Sara. Just that clarification. Mindfulness, meditation. I often myself think, well, hang on a minute, are they the same thing? Are they different? I don't know. I mean, as a practitioner yourself, can you perhaps go into that a little bit more for us about how we actually practice that and the differences, if there are any?
Sure, there are loads of differences, and there are loads of different techniques around the world. You've got this entire array of techniques that would fall under mindfulness, where you are using this awareness of various different aspects of your experience. But then, of course, there are things like visualization, there is chanting, there is more deliberate breathing exercises, there is generic mantras, there are personalized mantras, and then you can go into other practices like Qigong and Tantra. So it's actually a really, really rich offering that's out there. And the beauty of that is it means that there's going to be something out there for everyone.
And what brought you into this whole, world of mindfulness and meditation? Why is it important to you? And I'm assuming, we are asking the question today, does mindfulness really work? And do you have a definitive answer to that?
Certainly, I can speak from personal experience, and then having worked with about 7,000 people.
Wow.
It definitively does work. For me, I was a very skeptical party boy, but I overdid it, and I was burnt out from 7 years in the music industry. Total insomnia. Tried everything possible to try and fix it. Nothing worked. Within 2 weeks of doing this, insomnia gone. But then it was all of the other things that started unfolding that really got my attention, because I was like, wow, I hadn't even bargained for this, but I'm loving it. And the longer I did it, the more of these wonderful benefits started coming into my life, and I started to actually become the person who I'd always secretly hoped I would become, but never really thought was possible.
That's powerful.
Yes, that's why I'm sitting here today.
Absolutely, right, absolutely. Dr. Miguel, what are your thoughts on this? Do you have to be a certain type to be into this? Can anyone do it? Opening up this debate, really, what's your perspective on mindfulness? Are you for it? Are you against it?
Those are excellent questions. I think something extraordinary has happened in the last 20 years. So when meditation techniques started being studied by scientists in the 70s, this was very much a taboo subject. And look at what has happened.
Yeah.
So these techniques were part of the new age, and suddenly these things have become mainstream. And it says something about what's happening. So somehow these techniques are bringing us something that allow us to explore a space which has been neglected. I suppose part of this space has been something which religious, spiritual traditions have looked after. So in that sense, it makes sense, I mean, in that sense, we can understand why these techniques, such as mindfulness, were taken out of these traditions. But as Sara was saying, although they've been secularized, they do still retain some of those origins. And in that respect, like Will was saying, there's hundreds of these techniques developed throughout the various religious traditions, so from Hinduism and Buddhism to Christianity and Islam. And one of the reasons, there are two major reasons why such a variety of techniques was developed. The first one was that different techniques lead you to different places. So all of these are trying to shift your state of consciousness. That is probably the only major denominator we can find. But the other thing we know is that different people need different kinds of techniques. And this kind of insight is very present in the spiritual traditions, including Buddhism. And that is the reason also why these traditions have spoken of the possibilities that these techniques lead you to difficult places which may be counterproductive as well. So in that sense, meditation techniques like mindfulness will benefit some. It won't make anything really, it won't make different quite a lot of other people, and it may even be counterproductive to some others.
I think it's also important to understand that it wasn't just, weren't just born out of religious traditions. You know, lots of different tribal traditions also had various different techniques to get themselves into this place. And I would actually argue that a lot of the techniques that are out there predate a lot of the religious modalities. It's just that they got co-opted into various religious traditions and then got cookie-cuttered out to the following, as it were.
Right. I mean, I'll bring... No, please, this is good. Go on.
I agree to a certain point with that.
Yes.
So for a long time, we've been using techniques which make us bond together in a particular way. However, there was a shift at a certain point which led to these more specific and specialized techniques of what we usually call contemplation. And these are really different from those ritual techniques which were practiced mostly for the bonding of the group. It's for the whole group to get into a particular state of consciousness. But it's much more recently that meditation techniques like mindfulness were developed.
Interesting. Murali, I'm going to bring you in here. Professor of Psychiatry, mindfulness. I mean, where does this all fit in with your world? And what are your thoughts on this?
I would say it fits in extremely well, and it's much needed. You know, thousands of years ago, when the sages were developing and practicing mindfulness, they were not thinking about medical diseases. You know, they were thinking about enlightenment. They were thinking about happiness, group contemplation, etc. So they were not thinking about randomized clinical trials or effect sizes or sample sizes. But you know, the first generation of mindfulness trials that were applied to psychiatry were criticized because they lacked perhaps rigorous control groups. There were pilot studies that were small and they used convenient samples. But we've come a long way. I would say right now, if you go back and look at the literature, there are probably more than 100 or so good quality clinical trials for dozens of psychiatric disorders. And a recent meta-analysis, which is sort of a pooled analysis of all of the high-quality studies, found that depression, anxiety, chronic pain, these were three of the conditions where the efficacy of mindfulness was particularly well studied, and the effect sizes were moderate to large. And I'll give you one example of a very, very good study that was published in The Lancet a few years ago. It was done by a multi-center British group. They studied recurrent major depressive disorder, which is a very, very serious condition, high risk for suicide. And so in that particular condition, antidepressants don't often work very well. And we are sort of left with no good choices. So the trial took about 400 people with major depressive disorder. They randomly assigned them to either mindfulness or continuation antidepressant treatment. And after 2 years, they found essentially that mindfulness worked as well as prescription antidepressants for preventing relapses and recurrences. And similar studies have been done in other areas, such as heavy drinking, for example, where mindfulness has been shown in a 12-month trial to be at least as good as some of the behavioral approaches that are used to get people off substance abuse or heavy drinking. Now, that brings us to sort of a more recent issue, which is, now with the proliferation of apps, with the proliferation of even virtual mindfulness tools, how do we design the right kinds of studies to have the right kinds of control groups, and then to be able to demonstrate efficacy, because everyone's migrating to their smartphones. And so the traditional clinical trial has now become an online clinical trial. And so we need to rethink the process a little bit. But good news is that the overall evidence, in my view at least, is that mindfulness does have efficacy in some of the conditions I pointed out.
You mentioned antidepressants there as well. Are there any other alternate comparative approaches to the issues that mindfulness aims to tackle as well?
Sure. It depends on what you're trying to address mindfulness for, right? If you're trying to study basic brain processes, then you might need a different kind of control group than if you're trying to study a disease, than if you're trying to sort of prevent disease or build resilience. So, for example, if you're trying to treat a serious illness, you want to compare it with the best evidence-based therapies that are available for that disease, or maybe even try the two in combination to see if the combination does better than treatment as usual. On the other hand, if you're trying to sort of prevent disease or build resilience, maybe you want to compare it with exercise. Maybe you want to compare it with yoga. Maybe you want to compare it with other kinds of breathing techniques or music therapy or other even microdosing of psychedelics, may I say.
Wow. Can I ask, actually, as someone that's experienced mental health issues myself, and anyone feel free to pitch in if this applies to you as well, how open to it, how open to mindfulness as an approach are your patients or are people? Because it is, sort of points out what you were saying, Miguel, it's some people it doesn't work for, it can have adverse effects for some people. And I think my experience of it has been with people I know is that some people are really into it and open to it. I am a big open mind space sponge, vacuous probably. But some people I know think it's an absolute load of nonsense and it's not going to work for them. So how have you found with sort of patient approach? Are they open to trying this, or do they just want to reach for the pills, for example?
Well, it varies. So that's why what we are going towards is called precision medicine. One size fits all is not a good approach. We want to tailor the treatment so that it fits with the person's beliefs, their expectations. In fact, we want to enhance what I call the placebo effect. All treatments have a placebo effect. And if it fits with the patient's inherent beliefs and what they want to achieve, then I think that's when it works well, the alliance. So if someone's very natural and holistic, then this may be a good fit for them. If someone comes in and says, I'm very biological, and I have some patients who bring an anatomic coloring book, and they only want a drug that hits certain circuits in the brain, and then I can show them an MRI scan of how mindfulness changes the brain, Sara studies, for example, and then it works.
Yeah.
Can I challenge something on that, though? I completely agree with everything Murali's saying, but I do think there is some benefit in actually challenging people's paradigms a little bit and getting them to try new things, because in that come those bigger shifts, and it might actually be that their paradigms were part of the problem. And by providing them a solution that fits outside of their paradigm, you can actually help benefit them to a much broader degree.
Great, yeah, great counter-argument. And I think that's it. And I wonder how much of that is being open to change. And I think some people need that science laid in front of them, the evidence, as you say, Murali, that gives them that reason to, this is why you should bother investing in this or bother taking the time to do it. And I think anyone that I speak to, it goes, well, how long is this mindfulness going to take me? I think is straight away, don't even bother, because you're always backwards. Miguel, you want to say something there?
No, that's a really, really interesting point. I mean, it's important to be mindful of the fact that quite a lot of Buddhists, for instance, are unhappy with the way, clinicians have taken over one of their techniques. And one of the reasons is precisely that it's actually narrowing the possibilities of what comes with mindfulness meditation. So we're giving people a somewhat domesticated version of what mindfulness is. So in that sense, it works like a pill. So that instead of opening people to trying out and to exploring different aspects of themselves. On the other hand, just coming back to what Murali was saying, we have to strike a balance between, just giving drugs to our patients, and on the other hand, telling them that mindfulness is going to be a panacea. So in the same meta-analysis that Murali was mentioning, we know that it seems to have better effects for things like anxiety and depression, but it has lesser or much weaker effects for things like attention or eating disorders or sleep, for instance. So we need to strike a balance. Something else which is interesting, which we still know very, very little about. So for instance, when we come to the recurrent depression studies, so this model, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, was developed by some of the world-leading experts on cognitive therapy for depression. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why this model has become so important and so successful. But there are some things which are unclear. One of them is it the mindfulness meditation bit which is working, or is it what we call the psychoeducational aspect of how to deal with the depressing negative thoughts? So we're still unclear what is making the biggest impact. Something else which has come up in a number of studies is that this actually works better for people who are the most vulnerable, specifically those who have higher instances of childhood trauma. And why that is, we still don't know for sure. But again, the importance of individual differences, trying to tailor this kind of intervention to the individual.
That's fascinating, actually.
I mean, as a hypothesis for the answer to that, why is it helping people who've got the most trauma, is a lot of these Eastern techniques and methodologies came about with a view to addressing the root cause of our issues, whereas a lot of the modern approaches is very much symptom-specific.
Right.
And so we can work at the symptom level and try and make it go away as best as we can, or we can use these techniques which potentially expose you to a level of experience which actually facilitate your body to start purging itself of some of these negative memories and the emotional charge associated with it and whatever's going on physiologically as well as neurologically, so that you actually address that root issue.
I speak from lived experience of that, actually. It wasn't until I experienced deep mindfulness and sort of going almost into trance state that I was able, as you say, to repair or reframe the causes of trauma and the root causes of why I was taking the pills,
Exactly.
in the first place. Sara, go on, Murali, you're in, go on.
No, I just wanted to say one funny thing which just came to my mind.
Go on.
There's one alphabet that's different between the words medication and meditation. Noticed it.
That's very true. Listen, I'm a fully signed up member of both, and proudly so. Dr. Sara, Murali there was talking and saying that you could probably expand a little bit more as we know your excellent work, and my goodness, I love watching what you do and some of your experiments. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of the science behind the effect on the brain that you have experienced through your research with mindfulness.
Right. So as has been alluded to, right, so we take people who are going through these 8-week programs and we scan them in the MRI scanner before the 8 weeks and again after the 8 weeks. And we've shown that various brain regions change over just 8 weeks. And we've also shown that some of the changes correlate with changes in the symptoms, and that also some of the changes, though not all, correlate with practice time. So this gets a little bit at Miguel's question of, how do we know that it's actually practice and it's not just because you're coming to class in the psychoeducation? And probably both are contributing, but there have been numerous studies which have shown that often changes in symptoms are correlated with amount of practice. So people who practice more tend to have larger changes. And like I said, they also have larger changes in the brain, and these changes in brain correlate with some of these outcomes. Two of the most reliable changes that we're seeing is a change in the hippocampus and the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that's most associated with fear and anxiety and the fight or flight response. And it is known to control things like cortisol and inflammation. And what we found is that it gets smaller and that the change in the amygdala correlates with changes in stress. So the smaller it becomes, the more stress reduction people report. The other region, the hippocampus, it gets larger with practice. We know that people with depression have smaller hippocampi than people who are not depressed. And in one study, we have shown that changes in hippocampus correlate with a task that's related to thought suppression. And sort of a hallmark of depression and depressive thoughts is these recurrent thoughts that just keep popping up over and over and over again. And often people say that, I'm unable to focus on my work because these thoughts of, I'm not good enough and I can't do anything just keep popping up into their head. And it seems that this change in the hippocampus is related to the ability to suppress unwanted thoughts. So I agree with Miguel that there's a lot we still don't know, but there is some hints as to that, yes, it really is the meditation, and we're starting to kind of sort of get, some pointers as to bits and pieces of how it may be working.
Could I ask as well, how in your studies and research, how mindful practices have shown to change your brain, but when you put in healthy individuals compared to people with neurodegenerate conditions as well?
Yeah. No, so our first study was people, they were healthy, but stressed, right? And so technically stress is not considered a clinical symptom. I think all of us know stress. And so, so we've definitely done studies, that first study was with people with stress. We've often used people with anxiety, with people with depression. And again, there hasn't been enough studies, like we've not done a study where we've taken a group of people, like depressed people, anxious people, and controls and put them all through and then do a head-to-hip comparison. That hasn't happened yet. And also, there's just various different issues. So it's, but I think the general idea is that if we're all meditating the same way, then there should be more or less the same changes in the brain. Like I said, that some of the changes seem to be consistent across different studies, but there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah, I think there is, certainly. Murali, I want to eke out your time before you need to nip off and do something else particularly exciting and interesting.
Probably getting on the psychedelics.
Yeah.
I wish.
No judgment, all in the name of research, right, Murali? Always,
exactly.
Always right. Listen, we've just come out, or we're still sort of in, but I think we're going to be in this global pandemic, or certainly the aftermath and the effects of this for an awfully long time. What are your thoughts in your position as your role, the use of mindfulness as a self-administered preventative measure? This sort of taps a bit into what Miguel was saying, how, sometimes you need to be very careful on who you suggest, does this or doesn't, but to avoid ill mental health. And I'm very much, as a mental health campaigner, a massive, subscriber to the prevention better than cure, the early intervention before we get down a road of goodness knows what, self-medicating, it can go anywhere, can't it? So what are your thoughts on that, of using mindfulness and teaching it to Joe Public like myself as a preventative measure of ill mental health?
I fully support it. I think it should be one of the suite of tools. Mindfulness is, of course, not a panacea. It's not going to make COVID go away. It's not going to give us the hug we need from a loved one we're missing, or it's not going to put groceries on the table of someone who's lost their job. But that said, I think it can help in some very powerful ways. Maybe the most important is change our outlook, and as a result, change our actions and our decisions. So I tend to think of COVID as something that's infecting our minds as much as it's infecting our bodies. And if you think about the lockdown and isolation that billions of people are facing, it's probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, psychological experiment of all time. So there's massive increases in anxiety because of the uncertainty, there's stress. I heard that orders from takeout drinking shops, alcohol delivery services have gone up 1,000-fold. People are getting angry. Politicians are angry at each other. People are angry with each other about decisions and their positions on various preventive measures. So as you've heard, meditation and mindfulness can obviously help with anxiety, stress, depression, can help with anger, it can help with excess drinking. But more than that, I think it can improve life satisfaction. It can reduce burnout for frontline workers. And there are several large studies currently underway to actually test this in a rigorous way. For example, the mindfulness digital app Headspace has given out free mindfulness subscriptions to frontline doctors and frontline workers. And the University of California, San Francisco, the 5-system university, is doing a trial of over 1,000 people to see if it can help reduce stress. It's a purely online trial. Now, the controversial area comes in where, we know that mindfulness and types of meditation can improve our immunity. Is that helping somehow with COVID? Is that reducing inflammation? It may be. I have not seen definitive evidence of that in COVID-infected patients, but that's the kind of trial I would like to do. And last but not least, I think, if all our CEOs and government leaders practice mindfulness, maybe we'll come out of the pandemic in a much more socially conscious and better society. Let's hope for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm interested to know the rest of the panel really experiences sort of post-lockdown. We're still very much in this pandemic. Panic, very much so. But with regards to mindfulness, and has it changed or solidified your thoughts around that and what you've seen? With people that are accessing it or wanting to access it?
I mean, in terms of coping mechanisms, there is a very stark difference between all the people that I've worked with and what you see in general society. They're actually managing to maintain quite a high level of positivity, and they are coping with the uncertainty really, really well. They're seizing the day with actually the silver linings of the lockdown. They're enjoying actually having some time to themselves, and they're not getting lost in the drama like everybody else. And actually, their mentality seems to be, how can I help? I seem to be able to keep in this lovely centered state when all around me are losing their shit. And what can I do to assist these people? Because people I care about are freaking out.
Yeah.
And that is a very interesting thing to observe. It's very, very stark. And I think whatever techniques you're practicing, the chances are it's going to be helping keep you anchored when all around you is falling apart. And I think it's an opportunity for us as a society to actually embrace change, because we all knew things weren't working as well as they could or should. But we were kind of the status quo was so embedded that we didn't really know how to change it. And we've just had this circuit breaker moment.
Nothing has been bigger than this to give us an opportunity to change, and change can be scary for so many. But as you say, this shift to allow to do it. And I've been the same as you, and I'm sure all of us, I have adopted sort of mindfulness techniques and meditation to take that step back in the moments where my anxiety has threatened to resurface during the uncertainty, the vulnerability, the lack of control, which is my red rag to a bull when it comes to my anxiety disorder. It can absolutely rage. But to give you that sort of dissociated position to be able to then go, okay, I can sort of sit back and look at this. Miguel, thoughts on this?
I think we're all dealing with, extraordinary levels of uncertainty, and it's not just you who panics. We're awful when dealing with unpredictability. We hate this. It's the thing we hate the most. But in our industrial or post-industrial society, I think we hate it particularly because our world is much more controlled than it has ever been. So we're particularly bad at dealing with these levels of uncertainty. Now, I think there are lessons to be learned from the meditative traditions, including that of mindfulness. One is to have, that meditative practice as a little ritual. Because you know that having these anchors throughout the day, even if it's just once or twice, it really, really helps to structure your routine, to give you some sense of serenity and just distancing.
Which is what we've all needed with the complete lack of structure and routine, or indeed the complete change in structure and routine.
Absolutely.
I suddenly went from being able to palm my children off on a nursery for several hours a day to having my routine and structure completely changed. And my goodness, and I have it better than most. And I say it hit me like a brick wall, which I'm sure a lot of people.
What I'm thinking about, and that was, I suppose, what Will was hinting at, is to what an extent can mindfulness meditation help us to start thinking about what the world might look like, what kind of systemic changes may help us think to bring about. So that's something which lots of us are thinking while the politicians are trying to get back to the old system, because that's what they're being paid for. Quite a lot of us are thinking, can this actually remedy quite a lot of the ills we have suffering? The previous debate, for instance, was on the rising levels of mental health issues, particularly with young kids. So to what an extent can we actually come up with a better world, something which has been on our minds for a long time?
And if you think about it, stress does enlarge the amygdala. It does then activate your fear centers. And when people are in fear, they tend to go for safety first and certainty, and they want to cling to the status quo like mad. And if you've got these techniques which actually create the reverse effect, and people's amygdala is more balanced in its activation, that opens you up to the possibility of change and actually gives you the capability to adapt to changing circumstances and feel that collaborative instinct that we have had for millions of years as a result of our tribal traditions. And maybe we can lean on that a little bit more to collectively find a way through that is something that feels way better than what we've been living for this post-industrial age.
Who does, I mean, I don't know it's to you, Miguel, but to please everybody, you've all sort of answered this, but I'm interested to explore it further, really, and probably to our viewing audience. Who is it for? You know, I'm sure we'll all say, well, everyone can do it, but who specifically can, or is there anyone that can specifically benefit from mindfulness? Are there any mental health or mental illness that specifically benefits? You've mentioned anxiety and depression. I've suffered from both, and I have found it very, very useful. But, you know, PTSD, for example, is it beneficial for that, or the more severe end of the spectrum? That's perhaps a Murali question. But who can do mindfulness? And are there a particular demographic of people it specifically works for, or some that might have to work a little bit harder than others to really get the concept of it? I'll kick it open with you, Miguel.
Well, I started by saying that this has very much come out of the New Age spiritual milieu. So,
and I think, sorry to interject on that, and I think, you know, I'm going to be completely honest, I think a lot of people hold that unfair stigma about it sometimes, thinking it's a bit hippy-dippy, it's a bit, you know, it's rooted in Buddhism. I don't have that opinion, but I think people go, oh, it's all a bit fluffy. And I think this is why this debate is really important, to perhaps knock away a lot of that stigma.
Well, Murali was talking about microdosing on LSD. So, I mean, LSD was also something which was part of the counterculture. And there's now new studies showing actually that it can be beneficial under certain control conditions.
Woohoo! Joking.
And I mean, so there's a world of possibilities. I mean, however, I think one great difficulty is seeing how we can bridge what's happening at the individual level and the societal level. So, I mean, going back to LSD, so back in the 60s, people like Timothy Leary had, who was an LSD guru, had this idea that we're going to change the world by changing individual consciousness, right? So we just have to get LSD to political world leaders. This will change them and it will change the world. Well, it didn't quite happen for various reasons. One of them is that the kind of effects you get when you're trying to change your state of consciousness can go in very different ways. And something similar can happen with meditation. But the problem is, and this is also to a certain extent, I mean, we can also talk about psychotherapy. So psychotherapy has brought a lot of good, right, to lots of people, but how much has it changed the world? I mean, there's a book with a wonderful title, 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. And one of the reasons is because there really hasn't been enough thought about how can we bridge individual change towards societal change. There hasn't been many people thinking about this. And it's not really clear how this can be done. We've been taught, perhaps implicitly, we've been growing up with the idea that, yes, this can happen, but actually, how does it actually happen?
Yeah.
We don't know.
I think I'd like to jump in here, and I think it's very important for us to understand we live in a very intellectualized world. And we can read as many self-help books as we like, and we can come up with as many kind of intellectual programs as we like to try and change the way that we approach life. But the simple reality is we've got all of these other instincts and urges and parts of our brain that are activating as a result of various stimuli. So my argument to that would be, if you need to have these techniques as well as the intellectual discussions and reframing of things, because that will actually help you integrate these changes so that your behaviors end up aligning with your values, as opposed to there being this kind of weird duality within you whereby you know you should do this, but actually you find yourself being drawn to do that. So I would argue that one of the ways we can bridge that is actually by making these techniques as available as possible, so that people are actually having this fundamental subconscious change, as well as all of these wonderful realizations about what would be better.
So that is where I think you're really going on and being too hopeful here.
Possibly.
I don't think the mere availability of the techniques will make the difference. There's a whole mindset which would have to be changed. I mean, just to give you an example, we now have very clear historical evidence that meditation techniques were being used by the military in Japan during the Second World War to sort of depersonalize the soldiers, right? So these techniques can be used for very, very different purposes. So when you're talking about values, that is a different conversation which quite a lot of the academics are not interested in getting in, because once you get into it, then you have to go back to the religious roots of these techniques. And then that opens up a whole can of worms.
Well, I'm talking about you finding your own values as opposed to you downloading values from elsewhere. And I guess my point, maybe I didn't phrase it correctly, but opening yourself up to viewing situations in different ways rather than just being boxed off with your limited horizons and your limited interpretations, so that you can come to your own conclusions about a situation, but using these techniques in addition to that, so that you can perhaps arrive at a more progressive state than when you went into it. I'm not saying it's the panacea, but I think that combination of exposing yourself to new ideas plus exposing yourself to new techniques does offer a potential bridge to a better world. I'm not saying it will work that way, and I agree with you that we ought to think about how we can scale this up at a macro level so that we can actually move towards that world that we all know we want, but it's proving so elusive. That is, I guess, subject for maybe next year's conversation.
Quite possibly. Sara, I mean, Murali, I'll go to you first and then Sara. So, I mean, you were nodding away furiously at this. You know, what are your thoughts on what the chaps have just said?
There's truth in what everyone has said. You know, mindfulness, like any other tool, you know, can be a double-edged sword at times. But I believe that clinical settings, maybe there are about 30-40% of people for whom it doesn't work, or they don't like it, or they can't do it. That's true probably of many other types of therapies. So it's not unique for mindfulness. If you take medication, 30-40% of people have side effects from it. So that's perfectly okay. And then I'm not sure that even mindfulness, you know, there are many types of mindfulness, and it's not one size fits all. You know, I don't want a British voice teaching me how to do mindfulness. I'm Indian. I may want a Sanskrit voice, you know, and likewise, someone who's a novice may not want a deep, you know, Sanskrit voice, may want, you know, something more accessible. So I think what we as scientists should do is to try to see how we can tailor and develop these techniques in a way so that compliance is high. Again, as I mentioned, if there's a placebo component of it, there could be many active ingredients. I think Miguel pointed out, let's try to identify what are the sort of active ingredients that make people want to take part, that make people want to comply and make people want to stay in trials. There are many, many studies that show that novice meditators can be taught to meditate using both in-person classes, at-home classes, and even using apps. There was a recent trial at, you know, a 10-day course of meditation. You know, mindfulness was taught to novice people just by downloading an app. And they actually had a very nice control group where there was a Buddhist monk reading an ebook. It was a very unique control group, and they showed that even in novice meditators, you can improve levels of anxiety, stress, and life satisfaction. So I think it's possible for the majority of people. It may be easier for some than others because of their pre-existing beliefs and mindset.
Interesting. Dr. Sara, you've been listening to this, lots of little nodding away there. Sort of thoughts on what's just been spoken about on this?
Yeah, no, so first I want to talk about what Murali just said. I completely agree that you know, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out how to tailor programs for specific populations. So even some of the languaging, we're noticing here in the States that the person, John Kabat-Zinn, who originally created MBSR as a, you know, affluent white male, and the way he taught the class doesn't work so well for people of color. And so a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into just, you know, so the practice is the same, but just, you know, how the languaging of how you present it and the examples you give and stuff like this. And so, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done along those lines so that it's, you know, people understand it. I think that's a big part of it. But then getting back to the other debate about, you know, can it change the world and whatnot? I think it's really important to remember, so there's multiple types of meditation, which I think is really important. And getting back to the definition of mindfulness, because mindfulness is just awareness. And it's what do we choose to be aware of? And that's really, really key. So if because we can, often our psyche, doesn't let us see certain aspects of what's going on inside of us. And so change will only come to those parts of us that we actually look at. And I think a really great example, which is also relevant for what's going on right now, is that a lot of the teachers who originally brought mindfulness meditation to the States, they were part of the hippies, and they were definitely part of the, they were progressives, and they were definitely part of the, the race riots and, working for social justice back in the 60s and early 70s. But then, they went to Asia, they started practicing. And when they came back, they just started teaching. And it was really only until about 5-10 years ago that they realized that, that they were racist, right? This is something that's really coming out clearly right now, at least in America, that all white people are racist. We really, truly are. But we didn't own it, including these meditation teachers who had been in really deep meditation states and had made all sorts of, progress on their spiritual journeys, but they themselves had not seen that they were racist, and that they are, and it's really taken them a lot of work to see that inside themselves, and that they really had to use the mindfulness specifically in relationship to their racist tendencies to really start to understand and unpack those. So it's really important to, that yes, it has the power to change things, but only if we're willing to apply mindfulness to those issues in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we have to be willing to change. We can't change society. We can only change ourselves.
Yeah, which massively falls into what you're saying. Which brings me on to kind of common misconceptions, actually. Common misconceptions with mindfulness not necessarily being a quick remedy for things. I mean, perhaps you could talk us through that. I mean, Will.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it does deliver quick results, but I would never bank on that. I would always go into it with an open mind. If you're going to do an exercise protocol, you're not going to get a six-pack overnight. And it's very much the same with doing meditative stuff as well. Sarah's done some amazing work on neuroplasticity, for example, and for your brain to rewire itself and make all those new neuronal connections, again, it's not going to happen in a few days. It's going to take consistent practice to help rearrange your brain and all those connections. And of course, the other thing that I think people haven't connected the dots on yet is how much of an impact it can have on your body. Because, of course, that fight or flight response, which is being triggered all the time because of your overactive amygdala, is then having a corresponding impact on your heart rate, on your blood pressure, on your digestive activation, on your respiratory function, on your immunofunction, on your sexual function. So, of course, if you can actually achieve those changes in your brain and to your nervous system, then actually it's going to have an impact on all of your physiological systems. And that is going to enable you to feel healthier and more settled within yourself. And but again, it's like we're this complex Rubik's Cube that's all jumbled up, and you're not going to unjumble yourself overnight.
Sure, but I think that education is really important for people to understand the longer term effects on our whole self as a result of it. Which brings go on, Murali.
Thank you. I think this is a very, very important point, because if you look at the vast majority of studies in the literature of mindfulness, they've been relatively short-term studies. So if you look at cardiovascular disease studies or dementia studies, many of them are 3, 5, 10-year studies like the Framingham study. So what we need are substantive long-term studies to really look at meaningful outcomes. Does it, reduce the incidence of hypertension, diabetes, strokes? In Alzheimer's disease, can you slow the progression and reduce the rate of brain atrophy over 5 years' time? Can you even increase longevity? Because we know that mindfulness and meditation has an effect on the telomeres, on our chromosomes. So how do we study that? And could we develop biomarkers that serve as a substitute for doing long-term 5-year, 10-year studies? And I think that's a very important area for the field to really come together and agree upon.
Dr. Sara, we were talking, it leads on to both of what you were saying about changes, the time frame of changes in the brain caused by mindfulness practice. As a result of your research, I mean, what can you tell us about that?
Right. So, as Murali just said, pretty much all of the brain studies have only been 2 months. There's been very little long-term follow-up.
Gosh.
However, there have been many studies of long-term meditation practitioners, so people who've been practicing for many, many years. And it's clear that some of those brain regions correlate with years of practice. So it really does suggest that our brains continue to change, right? That and that the more you practice, the more your brain changes. And even in the course of the 8-week studies, there have been some meditation studies that looked at people after just 1 week of practice, and then others that looked at, say, 2 or 3, 4 weeks. And we see that there are different changes. And again, there hasn't been a systematic study looking at, okay, what happens at 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, which needs to be done. But it does suggest that the changes are that there's different changes happening at different times, which is sort of consistent with what people report, that, they start practicing. It's like, oh, okay, now I get it. Oh, now I really, really get it. And that things sort of shift and change over time as they sort of settle into it, understand it differently, they start noticing things. And so it seems like it's a very dynamic process. It's not just okay, you start meditating and you get it and then it's done. That it continues to unfold.
Which is exactly as you were saying, yeah.
So there's, just to add to that, there's actually some ambivalent evidence about this. It's true what Murali was saying, that most of the studies are not long-term. But I'm thinking of the first large meta-analysis published in 2012 in Psychological Bulletin, where when you look at the effects of not just mindfulness, but also other techniques like transcendental meditation, what you find is that the strongest effect you get is actually within the period in which you are learning the technique. So, usually these programs are for the first 8 weeks. So as you keep on doing it, what our intuition is that the longer you practice for, the greater benefits you get. But that's not what actually the evidence is telling you, is that after this initial period of learning, it plateaus, right? So that you don't keep getting an increase. And Sara, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think...
I have to against that.
And I would also want to say something against that.
Yes, people, let's jump in. Go for it.
And Fox's meta-analysis of structural changes in the brain also shows something similar, I think.
Well, okay, so here's the problem. So most of the behavioral data, most of the clinical data just looks at everybody. And what we know is that, and this has been shown now in several dozen studies, is that once the class ends, a lot of people stop practicing, right? And typically only about 30 to 40 people really continue practicing regularly. A lot of people, the class is done, they're done. And so when you look long-term at the benefits, what you see is if you just clump everyone together, then it's going to look like there's changes plateau, because you're combining the data from the people who stopped from the people who continued. And again, it's just like physical exercise. Like, if you work out and you build up your muscles and then you stop exercising, your muscles are going to atrophy. Same with the brain and with all these other benefits. If you stop practicing, you're going to lose the benefits. And what we have seen in a couple different studies is that if you separate the people who practice from the people who don't practice, there are indeed continued benefits in the people who continue practicing. So it's not just you plateau. You actually can continue to have benefits.
What about, sorry, go on.
And I agree with that, if you don't mind. So a paper was just published, I think last month, in Frontiers of Psychology. It's a 5-university study, including Carl Friston from London. Very interesting study. They looked at 10-year effects of mindfulness versus aerobic exercise. And at the end of 10 years, it was a pilot study, but at the end of 10 years, they showed that, the mindfulness group actually continued to improve and had better life satisfaction measures, lower stress, better immune function, better parasympathetic tone, like people mentioned, higher gray matter volume, compared to even the exercise group. The exercise group had, of course, better cardio-aerobic functioning, lower heart rate, better respiratory function, so on and so forth. So what this is telling me is, long-term, maybe these two have slightly different mechanisms, but some potential for integration. But this is the kind of long-term study that might actually surprise us if we do it.
And I'd just like to add to that. Obviously, I'm coming from an anecdotal point of view now, but what surprised me over the years that I've been teaching is that there are certain things which seem to come up at certain points in people's journey. And two of the ones that spring to the mind is it's always the third season of pollen exposure where people suddenly go, my hay fever is gone. It was still there in year 1, in year 2, year 3, it's gone. And with phobias, irrational fears, phobias, it's progressively getting better and better, and by the third year, like, they just don't care about the snake or the spider or going on the aeroplane anymore. And so what that's suggesting to me is, okay, these are areas where we should do some studies so that we can actually get some proper data to see if these anecdotes are being backed up across the board, because all of the things that I'm seeing are suggesting that actually there is continued progression. It might be that the biggest hit is in those first 3 months. We don't know.
Right. Well, just being the devil's advocate for a few more seconds.
Yes, please do.
What usually happens when you get people who keep on meditating for a longer time is that it's not just a meditation that they're doing a lot of other life changes. So there's other confounding variables. So those who are, which are not many, but the people who are more motivated to keep meditating, they will also generally do other kind of life changes.
But isn't that good?
Part of it. And that's
That's part of
actually
it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And we did a study.
But is it a
where-
meditation, or is it the beliefs that are associated then with meditation?
No, but it's not. But it's important because, again, it's about awareness. And so we just did a study where we were interested in changes in diet, but we wanted to see what was the effect. So we did a study where we recruited people and we said just stress reduction. We didn't talk about diet anywhere, anytime. At no time during the 8-week study did anyone mention anything about diet. But then at the beginning and the end, we just asked them, because we told them that the control group was going to be a diet group, right? And so we asked them a couple questions about their diet. And their diet changed in the meditation group. There wasn't actually a control group. But yeah, so even though they weren't talking about their diet, and no one ever told them to do anything about their diet changed. And this has been shown in a couple studies now. And so it's definitely, because again, the awareness, as you become more aware of what's going on around you, you start to make changes. You start to realize that, oh yeah, hanging out with that one friend, that one friend always, is toxic. I need to stop hanging out with that friend. Oh yeah, I had this bad diet. I need to change my diet. Because you're opening up your awareness, you're changing your life because you're realizing what you need. And that's part of it.
And also fight or flight.
I agree 100%. If you don't mind, both depression and happiness spread in like 7 degrees of separation, according to some studies, right? So if through mindfulness or any technique, you can change a person's attitude, you can change a person's behaviors, then of course you're going to influence multiple things in their life and their cascading effects. And all of those are great because we want it to cascade in a positive direction to help them flourish. And I'm not sure if I want to isolate a specific ingredient for efficacy purposes. Yes, for scientific purposes, as you say, we want to understand specific ingredients, but in a real world, we want effectiveness. And effectiveness, to me, I love it if it cascades through, multiple aspects of their life, because that's really what pills sometimes cannot do.
Right, absolutely. We could debate this for hours, and it's absolutely fascinating. We are going to have to start wrapping this up, and I'm loving the passion that's coming through from this as well. I guess by way of sort of a sort of semi-conclusion, what would you say? It's sort of directed to you, Will, but please do feel free to add as well, everybody else. What would be a wise approach for somebody that's looking to practice mindfulness and to introduce it into their life? Difficult because you don't know what's going on for them in their life, but just kind of as a general sort of rule.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, look at the various different options, and if you try something and it doesn't work, try something else, because there are so many different options. It's like there's this amazing patchwork quilt of offerings out there, and we can all gravitate towards that which we feel is best for us. But of course, sometimes people are very all or nothing, and so what I wouldn't do is exceed the recommended dosage, and I wouldn't try and be super hardcore straight off the bat. If you start trying to practice advanced techniques and you're actually at the novice level, that might not necessarily be that smooth. So, going at it in a relatively wise and moderate way is a good idea. I would also consider working with a teacher where you can. Obviously, we're now researching these digital solutions. We'll see what we get back from that data-wise, but there is this human interaction, which I'm sure Miguel would pull us up on. There is likely to be an added benefit to the individual from that personal contact. There is probably likely to be a greater level of ongoing practice as a result of that teacher almost being like a personal trainer. Mm-hmm. But also the teacher is able to identify what your character is. And, if you're really, really type A, then you kind of pull them a little bit over here. But if they're more like this, then you just lean them that way. And
so it's not a one-size-fits-all.
It's definitely not
one-size-fits-all. And I think that's
one-size-fits-all.
really important to get across, because I think a lot of people that are complete novices to mindfulness perhaps don't know that, you know, and I think it's like many of these sort of holistic therapies and talking therapies, you know, and everybody, we are all individual, we are all unique, so therefore we should all have a tailor-made approach. By way of closing, I mean, Miguel, any input on that?
Yeah, I would agree with Will that the face-to-face component is important. When I'm asked that question, I usually ask back, what is your motivation to try this out? Because that will point in a different direction. The other thing is, I mean, get some good information, which is difficult today because there's just so many books. So the right place to look at very soon will be the Oxford Handbook of Meditation, which I'm finishing to edit, which has everything from what the religious traditions say from a historical point to the neuroscience, to the clinical stuff.
Murali?
So I obviously, you know, I'm very enthusiastic about the evidence, but I feel like there's still a lot more we need to learn. What I would like to do is, because we are restrained by the small sample sizes each of us can do, how wonderful would it be if every neuroscientist in the world, indeed every scientist, comes together and we do a crowdsourced global neural lab, you know, where we share data, we pool resources, and we can study millions of people in multiple cultures to try to understand the benefits and possible risks. So that's really my dream.
Nice.
Fantastic. And Dr. Sara, as our chair, your thoughts on this with, mindfulness? What's the best approach?
Right. I think the most important thing is patience, realistic expectations, and lots of self-kindness and self-compassion. Because again, you know, there's a lot going on inside of us. You're going to start becoming aware of what's going on inside of you, and you may not like some of what you see. And so it really takes, you know, a little bit of realizing, okay, everyone has these thoughts. You know, I'm not weird. I'm not different. You know, this is all completely normal. You're going to struggle with your thoughts. It's going to be, you know, there's going to be days you're going to sit down and meditate and your mind is racing the whole time. That's okay. That's normal. This is also where a teacher is really, really useful, because you can go and say, I can't do it. And they'll reassure you that, yes, you can, and help you get through your particular roadblocks. So lots of patience, lots of perseverance, and just realizing that, you know, it's going to take time. You know, as Will said, you know, it may be a year, 2 years, 3 years before you see some of the benefits, but you will see some benefits pretty quickly. Most people report some sort of benefit, but then continued benefits over months and years.
Well, thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. So, of course, once again, a huge thank you to all of our panellists. Will, thank you very much. Dr. Sara, thank you for chairing. Murali, thank you for hanging on for us. And, of course, Miguel. And, of course, myself as the host today, Anna Williamson. So we started off our debate today on the Brain Forum with, does mindfulness really work? I guess that question really is for you to answer at home. I think as a panel, we have given a yes, it can, in inverted commas, but we have an awful lot more to learn. Thank you for watching.